On the 28th of July, 1945, a small airplane flying in thick fog crashed into the Empire State Building. The accident took the lives of all 3 passengers and 11 people inside the building. But one person in the building survived twice on that dreadful day. The firefighters managed to put down the fire in 40 minutes. One engine fell into a nearby art studio, and another engine and the landing gear plunged into an elevator shaft. Betty Lou Oliver, then a 20-year-old elevator operator, was on the 80th floor when the plane hit. The collision threw her from the elevator, and she needed medical help. Rescuers put her in another elevator to take her down to safety, but they didn't know that the cables were damaged. As the elevator began to descend, the cable snapped, and it plummeted 75 stories. Betty was fully conscious, so she decided to cling on to life. She felt the elevator was rushing away from her and held on to the sides not to float. And she survived despite everything. 2 factors likely saved her life. The air pressure in the shaft slowed down the elevator's fall, and it hit an oil buffer at the bottom, which went through the floor but cushioned the impact. Cables lying at the bottom may have also helped make the landing not so harsh. Betty got multiple fractures in her pelvis, back, and neck, but after several months of recovery, she lived for another 54 years. When she was 20 years old, Helen Claiborne left Brooklyn to search for some adventure. After hanging out in Alaska for a few months, she decided to move on to Hong Kong or India. But first, she needed to get to San Francisco. She got on a single-engine plane from Fairbanks to Whitehorse in the Yukon, Canada. They couldn't take off for 3 days because of snowstorms. Maybe it was a sign not to go, but who reads signs at the age of 20? So they finally took off for British Columbia, even though the weather was still pretty rough. The pilot tried to navigate through the blinding snow and crazy winds, flying above the clouds. When he descended, he hoped to follow the Alaska Highway to reach their destination. But he was an inexperienced pilot and didn't know how to fly using only the plane's instruments. In bad weather, he couldn't rely on anything else. They didn't have enough food or survival gear like an axe or sleeping bags. Helen felt something was really wrong. She saw trees on a mountain that were dangerously close to them. So the plane crashed into a remote mountainside near the Yukon-British Columbia border. By some miracle, they both survived. Helen had a broken left arm, and the pilot fractured his jaw and several ribs. They spent the following 49 days in freezing temperatures, some of that time in the wreckage, and some in a lean-to the pilot built. Finally, they were rescued. Helen wrote a book about their adventures, which was turned into a movie. Salvador Alvarenga definitely deserves the title of a real-life Robinson Crusoe. On November 17, 2012, this fisherman from Mexico set out on a regular working day. They were just 50 to 100 miles from the shore. Alvarenga was planning a 2-day trip with his younger colleague. A storm was coming, but he was sure they could handle it. But their engine failed, and for 7 days, the storm tossed their boat around. They had no food, no survival gear, and their boat was barely functional. After the storm, they drifted far from Mexico. They could see planes flying over them, but couldn't send them a signal for help. They first got some rainwater to drink after only a month. Alvarenga managed to catch some fish for them with his bare hands. They also had to catch and eat seabirds and drink their bodily fluids when they were too thirsty. His colleague passed away, and Alvarenga was now completely alone in the open sea. He kept his optimism and never gave up, singing hymns and signaling to cargo ships that never saw him. After 438 days adrift, he finally saw mountains and swam to shore in the Marshall Islands. Locals helped him to get to the hospital. He became famous overnight, although some people didn't believe his story was real. Now, they say lightning never strikes the same place twice, but Roy Sullivan would beg to differ. Lightning struck this man 7 times, and he survived all of it. That's how he got the unofficial title of Human Lightning Rod, and an official mention in the Guinness World Records book. Sullivan claimed that he was first struck when he was still very young and helping his father cut wheat. The lightning left no traces on his body then, and there was no one who could confirm it, so it didn't go in the count. As he grew up, he got a job as a ranger in one of the national parks of Virginia. The superintendent of the park documented all 7 strikes that happened there. Once, he was hit in the fire lookout tower. Another time, a tree that was struck by lightning sidetracked into the open window of his truck. There were incidents when lightning would set his hair on fire, and one time when it moved down his left arm and left leg and knocked off his shoe. How he survived remains a mystery. But if I had his luck, I'd buy lottery tickets every day. Otherwise, I would not stand next to this guy in a storm. Now, when paragliding is your hobby, you have to be prepared for all sorts of emergencies, like, say, a giant thunderstorm taking you in with all of its force. This is what happened to Eva Wisniewska, who was preparing for the World Paragliding Championships in Australia. A sudden storm carried her to a height of more than 32,000 feet. She didn't believe she would get out of it alive. The glider was climbing and climbing until it got completely dark. She was trembling with cold, and all the equipment was wet and frozen too. At some point, Eva heard thunder right in front of her and realized she was in the eye of the storm. She lost consciousness for around a half an hour and then woke up, still inside the storm. Suddenly, she saw the Earth and felt like she had a chance to get down there alive. In the end, she only got some frostbite on her face and some abrasions to her leg. A member of the crew that was rescuing her called it a medical miracle. Apollo 13 was NASA's third moon landing mission, but the astronauts never actually got to land there. About 56 hours into the flight, an oxygen tank blew up, so they had to cancel their landing plans. The spacecraft was badly damaged, so it was impossible to use it to complete their mission. The crew reported about the problem with the phrase that went down in history: "Houston, we've had a problem." Captain Jim Lovell was already a highly experienced astronaut, and he took the only possible decision. The lunar module, Aquarius, was still functional. It wasn't built for re-entry or for housing 3 people, but it was better than nothing. Aquarius saved the crew and served as a makeshift lifeboat. The crew had a long, cold trip to Earth crammed into Aquarius. They had to power down all systems that weren't essential for the spacecraft to save energy. Without any sources of heat, it was soon freezing cold in the cabin. Some of their food soon got bad. They also had to ration water to keep enough liquid to cool the hardware down. When the time for re-entry approached, the crew moved back into the Odyssey and powered it up. Thanks to huge efforts and professionalism of the crew, mission control, and spacecraft manufacturers, all 3 astronauts safely splashed down in the Pacific Ocean near Samoa. The astronauts lost some weight and weren't completely healthy when they got back, but the most important thing is they all made it back alive.